Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are, whatever your time zone. Welcome. This is AI Talk, and I'm your host, Kevin Crane. Welcome to the show. Today, we will be discussing the topic of how generative AI can enhance your organization. We'll be diving into the transformative potential of generative AI and how it not only can enhance your organization's capabilities, but bring about real digital transformation and indeed redefine how we work. As Gen AI continues to evolve, it holds the potential to streamline operations in ways that were never possible just a couple of years ago. And make no mistake, it will transform how we manage and leverage data, knowledge, and decision making for business performance. And the impacts and implications will touch upon all key areas of business: operations, marketing, customer experience, cost reductions, compliance, you name it. However, with all of this potential comes a pressing need to understand the implications, the risks, and the responsibilities that come along the way with adopting such transformative technology. It's essential for organizations to consider how Gen AI not only improves performance, but also will shape the future of work in profound ways. So, today we'll discuss three topics to consider. We'll discuss how Gen AI will impact knowledge management and the future of work, and what that means for the future of your workplace. We'll talk about identifying the risks and obstacles in adopting Gen AI, from integration challenges to potential biases. We'll examine the hurdles organizations may face along the way. And we'll also talk about defining your AI governance strategy. We'll break down the importance of establishing a robust governance framework and what that framework might look like. So stay tuned for a great conversation with a great panel of guests today. But before I introduce our guests, as always, I want to say that we want to hear from you too. And that includes folks joining us on LinkedIn. Hello, everybody. And the folks joining us on Zoom. Join us on Zoom for the full experience. Thank you. It should be a great discussion today, but we want to hear from you too. We want to encourage everyone attending today to participate. So please join in with your comments in the chat section. If you have a question along the way, jump on in. I will attempt to get some of your questions into the flow of the show today, and we'll have a few minutes also at the end for your questions. All right, we've got a lot to cover, so let's jump on in and introduce our guests today, starting with Brenna Snyderman, Managing Director for the Center of Integrated Research at Deloitte. Brenna, welcome aboard. Where are you calling in from?
Thanks, Kevin. I'm actually calling in from Philadelphia today in the United States.
Wonderful, Philadelphia. Happy Thanksgiving to you, Brenna.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
very good, Brenna. Thank you so much for joining us. Also joining us today is Jamie Graybert, President and Co-founder at the Consultancy Group. Jamie, are you with us?
Good morning, Kevin.
All right, Jamie, how are you? Welcome aboard. Where are you
I'm
calling in
great.
from today?
San Francisco Bay Area.
The Bay Area. Once again, Jamie, thank you so much for being back with us again on the show. Also joining us today is Chris Surdak, Managing Director and Advisor at the Frontier Foundry. Chris, welcome aboard. Where are you calling in from?
I am calling out from the outskirts of Los Angeles where it's cloudy, so most of the population is hiding under a desk somewhere.
Well, hello, Chris. Three Americans today. Fantastic. I want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving to everyone across the world, whether you are American or not. I hope that you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving time. All right, enough of all of that. Let's jump into it. I'd like to start our discussion today by drawing our attention to an article published recently by Forbes called How AI is Revolutionizing New Product Development. The article talks about how artificial intelligence is transforming industries by reshaping how products are conceptualized, developed, and brought to market. In the realm of new product development, AI accelerates innovation, from automating routine processes to uncovering consumer trends and predicting market demands. AI is empowering our businesses to design smarter, faster, and with more personalized solutions. It uses case studies in the article from across sectors like beauty, consumer goods, and healthcare, with pioneers like Estee Lauder, Procter& Gamble, and IBM leading the charge. I'd like to get the panel's impression of the article today. Brenna, what are your thoughts on the article? Did it miss anything important that we should also be considering?
I don't think so. I thought it was a really interesting and very sort of broad survey of a lot of the possibilities that generative AI can illuminate for an organization. I mean, to me, one of the more compelling ones was in the life sciences healthcare space, where the article talked a bit about ways that generative AI could take a lot of sort of document reviews and literature reviews down to mere hours as opposed to months and sometimes years. So I just the ability to sort of crunch time was pretty compelling to me.
And time is money, as they say. Yeah, right? Now, Jamie, the article also talks about personalization and embedded AI with companies like AI, highlighting AI, creating personal experiences, AI assistance, streamlining new product development workflows. Jamie, what are your thoughts on the impact of personalization and embedded AI in new product development?
Well, from a communication standpoint, Kevin, it's really made things a lot easier for marketers and anyone who really communicates, which is everyone at this point. But from a Gen AI standpoint, especially, we see personalization. You're able to customize messages much faster to a more tailored audience. And you're able to get data on those utilizing those same AI tools. You're able to get data and process it so that you know how your message is landing. Is it landing on the right audience? And so you're able to actually, in a lot of ways, complete based on and some of it's based on modeling, but in a lot of ways, you're able to close the feedback loop more so than we've been in the past, which is very helpful to know, if are you communicating through the right channels to the right people. For example, one of the biggest places that we see that we see the use of AI or personalization using AI is writing emails. As you're able to write those emails in a much more efficient manner, not relying solely on the tool, but definitely leaning heavily on it. And then also, from an advertising standpoint, now you can utilize the Gen AI tools to better serve ads to a more targeted audience. So from that standpoint, it makes us much more efficient with our dollars. The only caveat being, you still need the people to manage, maintain, and make sure that those are still the right audiences. And what I mean is, Kevin, at the end of the day, we're humans communicating with humans. We're just utilizing digital tools to do it.
Well, and as I mentioned in the start, these tools are giving us capabilities that were not possible just a couple of years ago. They're really moving the needle in terms of digital transformation and organizational performance. Now, Chris, I'd like to talk with you a little bit about your thoughts about the article's discussion about data-driven innovation. It talks about Estee Lauder leveraging first-party data to create AI tools like trend spotters and product idea generators. What is your impact of the article and the aspect of data-driven innovation?
Well, I think we've seen several decades of data-driven decision making, and generative AI is just sort of giving us the ability to cast a much wider net, and therefore greater ability to feed a creative process. But I actually want to pick up on something that Jamie kind of ended with. I think there's two things that make us a unique species. We're storytellers and we're tool users. And generative AI is this very interesting overlap of those two aspects of what makes us human. And so if technology is an amplifier of our human capabilities and Gen AI is dramatically an amplifier, you got to be really careful about the things that you're amplifying. So I think the challenge is particularly in generative AI is proper use case use and then proper deployment, and you're ensuring that you're getting the results that you want from the use cases that you apply this amplifier to.
Well, all right. The article is from Forbes. It's called How AI is Revolutionizing New Product Development. There is a link here in the chat feature. Hey, everybody, go out and take a look. Tell us what you think about this article. What are your experiences that might mirror some of the innovations or opportunities that the article is presenting? And do you agree or disagree with the article? We want to hear from you as well. So take a look. It's right there in the chat feature. All right. Everyone, let's move on to our discussion points today. We have three of them that we're hoping to get through today, starting with how generative AI will impact knowledge management and the future of work. Brenna, as Gen AI continues to evolve, how do you foresee it shaping the roles of knowledge workers and the future skills that it will demand?
Sure, it's a great question. And I'll preface this by saying I lead, along with others within Deloitte, a quarterly study of executives and workers and how their use of generative AI is evolving and how they're seeing the value from it and the challenges that they're facing. And I think a couple of things are becoming clearer to me quarter by quarter as we look at the use of generative AI in organizations. The first thing that we're seeing is that sanction generative AI tools within an organization, their penetration among the general employee workforce is relatively low. And if we're looking to build a workforce that is able to use generative AI, that can bring it into their day-to-day work, we have to give them access to these tools to enable them to use them. Otherwise, you run the risk of having people use external tools that aren't sanctioned by the organization, which can drive up a lot of data privacy issues and a whole host of things. So the first thing I think in terms of preparing the workforce is ensuring they have access to sanctioned tools. The second thing we have found in our research is what organizations have found thus far in their experience to be the most valuable way that generative AI has been brought into the organization is when it's embedded into tools that the workforce is already using. So we're not asking them to use a standalone tool in a completely new way, but it's already baked into the tools that they have at their fingertips, and they're seeing the impact of it. Which I think brings up the next element, which is there needs to be a trust element involved as well. So workers need to understand, or employees need to understand, why the generative AI tools are being used, that they're not necessarily being brought in to, replace someone, but to really augment and help them do their job, and to see the benefit and the impact of how generative AI is helping them to do their job. With respect to how organizations and workers are using it right now, what we're seeing, unsurprisingly, and this is fairly similar to any new or emerging technology when it's first sort of brought in, is it's helping people in the short term become more productive and more efficient. We are starting to see some examples of innovation and growth and wholly new uses emerge. Those take a little bit of time as people familiarize themselves with the tool.
Interesting your comment, Brenna, about sanctioned tools versus unsanctioned tools, and whether it's embedded in the tools that we use. It sounds like it's still a little bit like the Wild West, where folks are just adopting it on their own and using it on their own. Do you see that evolving in 2025 with more and more sanctioned tools and more embedded tools coming on board?
I do. I think some of it is that organizations are starting to understand and try to get their arms around governance and data protection. And those are two critically important things. If you're using unsanctioned tools outside of your organization, the organization doesn't have as much of an ability to control what data is being placed into those models, or to protect, their proprietary data. So I think as organizations recognize the importance of that, there will be a lot more sort of governance around it. I also think that as these tools just become more familiar in general, that they will be rolled out to a broader swath of the workforce.
And lead to that innovation that you're talking about. What are some of the areas of innovation that you've discovered?
So I think some of them are a few of the ones that we talked about that actually emerged from the in the article, the Forbes article. There are a few others that we've seen, whether it's using customer service agents to help more personalized interactions with customers and clients. We've actually been seeing, some telecom companies using generative AI to help them with things like preventative maintenance, so that they are sort of addressing problems before they arrive or before they become a massive issue. And a little bit more also around use in a technology space, sort of continuous improvement processes. So constantly leveraging customer feedback to feed it into a product development cycle, so that the product development is faster and more attuned to customer needs. And those are just a few of the examples that we've seen.
Now, Chris, I know you are involved with knowledge management and information management. Chris, in what ways do you see Gen AI transforming knowledge management within organizations, especially when it comes to organizing, retrieving, and utilizing really vast amounts of unstructured data?
Well, I think there's one of the challenges of the technology is it does allow people to access vast amounts of information that they may not have previously had access to, and to be able to consume it in ways that they previously weren't able to. But this leads to the question of, does the producer and consumer of that information have adequate experience, knowledge, what have you, in order to properly assess that? So a lot of the times when people talk about hallucinations with the technology and so forth, oftentimes you need someone with sufficient knowledge to understand when it is either producing false results or it is hallucinating and so forth. So we get this sort of conundrum in the use of the technology where it's highly polarizing of the workforce, and particularly in a knowledge management perspective. At the
Mm.
lower end of value delivery is sort of what I call the digital gray goo use cases, where you're just producing vast quantities of stuff and hopefully some of it hits and sticks to the wall. At the far other end of the value proposition is sort of the research assistant value use case, where you have someone with deep expertise and this technology is allowing them to produce or against their expertise either faster, more efficiently, or more effectively. So you have the effective versus the efficient two ends of the use cases. And so again, use case selection is critically important in terms of getting value from the technology. And it also leads to a very interesting conundrum, which is people at the lower end of that value scale, how do they develop the skill set so that they reach that level of expertise later on? If there's a skills gap between those high-end knowledge workers and the lower end people that are trying to work their way up, are we deepening that gulf between those two sets of people, or are we facilitating the growth of people's expertise?
Now, Chris, not to get into the weeds too far, but you mentioned hallucinations, and we hear about hallucinations, but I don't know if everyone's always clear about exactly what that is. What do you mean when you say hallucinations, and what do we do to avoid that?
It's sort of this interesting behavior from LLMs where they seem to run off the rails a little bit and provide responses to a question that seems somewhat nonsensical, or they're actually, there's a lot of instances in the legal profession where people will ask it for case law and it will invent cases that never happened. Which is a bad day for an attorney if they submit that to a court, as many attorneys have found out to their great displeasure. But you have to remember that these systems don't actually know what they're saying or what they're doing. They're just producing word streams where the next word that they produce is the most probabilistic next word to show up. And so this is this notion of prompt engineering. These systems are context blind. They have no concept of what you're asking them. They're just coughing up the next word that makes the most probabilistic sense. And so the way in which you structure the questions that you ask them, some people call this prompt engineering, is determinative of the result that you get. This then leads to another problem where I ask the question in a certain way, Brenna asks the same sort of question, but in a slightly different way. She's going to get an entirely different answer. Jamie asks a third way, she gets a third different answer. And so this can lead to significant challenges from a compliance perspective, let's say, where, again, the structure of the question is determinative of the result. And how do I reproduce those results at a later date in a way that's predictable?
Okay. Prompt engineering, that's a big subject that maybe we should cover on this show. I think that, Chris, you brought up a very important point, not only for hallucinations, but for the effectiveness of Gen AI itself. So perhaps we'll have an opportunity to explore that on a further on an upcoming show. Now, Jamie, what are your feelings about the long-term implications of Gen AI on corporate culture, particularly when it comes to collaboration and knowledge sharing and decision making?
I think that it can have a very positive impact. But I think there has to be a number of things. One, you need a governance plan. Like Brenna's already stated, sanctioned use of the tools. Make sure that everybody knows and understands the tool, its capabilities, and how it impacts their role. And then have a strategy for implementation. Have regular touch bases or regular, I guess audits would be the right word, to make sure that it's being used properly, that the data that it's either going in or coming out is accurate. And you do that by committee. You do it by individual, but also by committee, because someone in, let's say, operations may not have this or may know more about a certain thing than a person in marketing or in another department. And so you want to make sure that your channels are correct. But then you want to come together and say, okay, now this is coming from our department, because one thing you see is that in collaboration, and it's always best if you can get the full organization behind something and really manage it and utilize it to its fullest potential. Otherwise, you're paying for bells and whistles you don't need. But you also want to make sure that the people have an understanding of, okay, well, is something getting lost in translation between this department and this department? Are the numbers actually coming through? Is the process the same? And so I think you just want to make sure that in collaboration, it's going to be a positive thing. I think people are fearful of it because it seems like every other day I'm getting some email newsletter that says, oh, well, this job's going to be terminated. because of AI. And I don't think that's the case if it's handled properly by organizations. And I think, to Brenna's point, the reason that there is some, slow rolling into this is that governance is going to be an issue, data privacy, but also you have to get people on board to understand that your role is just going to change. We need to reskill
Hmm.
you. We don't need to get rid of you. You don't need to go to this entirely different department, because everybody in business knows that it costs way more money to onboard a new employee than to retrain the existing, simply because of tribal knowledge and their understanding of politics and how things work within the organization, and the knowledge that they have gleaned. So I think it's going to be that. And I think that's where a lot of things go off the rails, is fear. We do a lot of silly things out of fear. And so you don't want to see people, that's one way of collaboration. But the other, is looking at it from different lenses within the organization of, hey, there's more knowledge available to me. And knowledge is power. Knowledge and sharing knowledge is truly powerful. So you want to make sure that everyone within the organization understands their role within it. The AI sphere, they understand how the tool is going to be used. And that's done from, I hate the phrase top down, but for lack of a better way to put it, it starts at the top, and that has to be communicated through the different levels. And then people need to make sure that Maslow's lower hierarchy of, you're going to be okay in this, you just need to relearn your skills, or relearn, not necessarily your skills, but relearn how to use this tool and how it can actually make your job easier and create more opportunities within the organization, and create new opportunities for you to collaborate with other departments.
I used to have a vice president that would say about leadership, it's your job to describe the future to the best of your ability, the most accurate and most truthful, and where people's place in that future is, so that people feel like they have a place in the impending future that they may be fearful of. So you're bringing up
Yeah.
some really great points. And without that, you can't expect people to adopt new technologies and manage that change without that feeling, getting into the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you will, like you say, Jamie. All right, we are
Yes.
here today with Jamie Grabert, Chris Surdak, and Brenna Snyderman. We're talking about how Gen AI can enhance your organization. If you have a question for our group today or a comment, please pop it into the chat feature and we'll get it into the flow of the show. But for now, let's move on to our next topic for discussion today. And that is identifying the risks and obstacles of adopting Gen AI. And Brenna, I'd like to go back to you, if I could, because of you mentioned a moment ago the idea of sanctioned versus unsanctioned apps and tools, and in bringing AI into the infrastructure of your organization. What do you feel are the biggest challenges that organizations face when integrating Gen AI into their infrastructure, and how do we overcome those barriers?
Sure. So I think there's a couple things that are particularly challenging. One is, I think, sort of the regulatory landscape can be a little bit challenging. It's still, organizations are not quite sure. There are regulations tend to vary by region. And we see that regulations also tend to lag behind sort of the technology's capabilities. So that is a challenge that organizations are dealing with. I think another challenge that we see in general is that um, organizations also have to understand what data they even have at their fingertips in the first place to be able to protect it, to be able to understand how to use it. That's been a challenge that organizations have faced for a very long time. It's not new to generative AI, but suddenly when you're feeding data into models, when you are using that data, to Chris's point, to make probabilistic determinations, when you are using it to help you make decisions or to innovate, you have to make sure that that data is trustworthy, that it is, the right data, that you know where that data is coming from. There are also ethical challenges around it where you need to make sure that the data you're using is ethical, that it is not producing biased results. So there's a whole host of challenges that come from the data itself. I think the other challenge is also sort of organizations struggling a little bit around how do they protect the data from a cyber perspective? How do they make sure that there is a way that the data itself is not going to be accessible elsewhere, that the models themselves are used appropriately. I think what we're seeing a little bit is that organizations are in some ways almost more conservative about data, seeing it almost as a barrier as opposed to an accelerator of the things that their organizations can do. So these are a few of the things that we're seeing. I think another challenge is just compliance in general. A lot of industries, whether it's finance or life sciences and healthcare, there's a lot of regulations on data privacy. So making sure that you're complying with those regulations while also using the data to the best of your ability.
All right, folks, we are getting questions coming in from our audience today. I'd like to put this out to the entire group, so please jump in. Craig is asking or commenting, and thank you, Craig, for your comment today. Craig says, in terms of unsanctioned AI, shadow AI, if you will, we never really solved shadow IT in the first place. How do we develop cultures of responsible AI use? Anyone have a response that you'd like to provide for Craig on that?
I'll jump in. I guess, I mean, particularly LLMs, things like ChatGPT they were built to be inherently feral. They're going to be in the wild, and one of the greatest challenges of the technology, both its greatest benefit and its greatest risk, is that you can ask it anything and it will respond to anything. And so this oversight question and becomes critical because, again, if you don't know what the right answer is and you take a response that's incorrect, you wouldn't know it. And so we need to be very cautious of those use cases where we're applying the technology so that the person that's asking the question knows if they're getting a wrong answer. So, and that requires oversight. I frequently say, and I've been in the governance game a long time, AI governance is absolutely imperative because AI is inherently ungovernable. That doesn't mean you don't. That doesn't mean you don't try. In fact, it means you need to try even harder because it can't be governed. So it's, again, a bit of a conundrum.
I think that's a good point, Chris. And to get back to your point, Jamie, about, AI is not going to make humans obsolete because you need to keep a human in the loop to make sure that the data you're getting is accurate. I think to build on your point, Chris, if a generative AI model throws off a result that's incorrect and you don't correct that or don't mark that, now you have a model that's not only throwing off incorrect things, but also building upon that incorrect information so that it just compounds upon itself.
It's absolutely critical that people understand that this is a technology as currently architected that is becoming optimally deceptive and optimally sociopathic. Because if you ask it, what color is George Washington's white horse, and it says black, and you accept black, it now believes that black is the right answer going forward. So from a governance perspective, that becomes a significant challenge, and you need to be on top of that.
Well, so I want to throw this at you, Chris, then. What do you think about, and we talked briefly about this yesterday, is that some organizations or channels are utilizing smaller language models, utilizing an AI within themselves, or taking a larger open source tool and really condensing it, building the walls around it. Do you feel like that is a smarter use of of the technology and of our efforts versus this large chaotic beast that I know when I read something by the first sentence, in today's competitive culture, immediately you are now reading AI because everything starts with a prepositional phrase. So that, okay, maybe I need to, but there are other people who are getting a little savvier that maybe fix that intro or fix a piece of it, but then 3/4 of it's way off. So what are your thoughts? Is it better to start small or stay small, or should we, find ways to better govern or better utilize the larger tools?
You're spot on. Small language models, I think, is where it's at. You may use the large language model as the sort of source code for that subsequent model. But one of the examples I know of is an insurance company that wanted to have auto generation of, say, policies. So you load it with every policy they've ever written, and then it's better at generating new policies based upon that. That system does not require 50 million tweets about the Kardashians in order to perform better. Right. And so the building of a general use generative AI, while very sexy and very, again, it's feral. It's not necessarily generating better results for you. And the more generic you feed this beast, the more likely it is it's going to go off the ranch at some point and give you those weird hallucinations and so forth. So I think small language models are definitely much more appropriate and more governable.
Well, this is why I think it's also very important before you go into acquiring any generative AI tool or building one or implementing one is to know what you're building it for and how it fits in the strategy of the organization. I think there is a tendency when there's a brand new technology for leaders to get extremely excited and say, like, I need a generative AI, get me a generative AI, everyone's got this. But you really have to step back and think about what is the strategy of my organization? How do people work? What tools are they using? What data do we actually need to dive more deeply into, and how can this tool help us? And then that also then brings you, is a small language model, a medium language model, a large language model? Is it open source? Is it you can't make those decisions if you don't know what you're going to use it for and have a clear use case for it.
And for me, it goes back also to the credibility of the information. If you're staying tight within your organization, if you're using those small to mediums and you are the only people feeding data into this thing, then your results should be much better than the world that's searching for. Chris, to continue with yours, is what are the Kardashians up to this week and how is that impacting my, I mean, I'm baffled by the people who use ChatGPT or some of the other tools, Jasper or whoever, to answer questions like they're a search engine. I mean, Google will now give you Gemini's answer to things. You don't have to, wreck the rest of the tools to do that. But, I think for me, utilizing, and that's one of the things with our clients that we talk about is, if you want to use the larger models, great. But when we're talking about in-house, when we're talking about utilizing, you want to build your quarterly report, let's say, you want to use your data. You don't really, what's going on out here, you can use that to get an outline, whatever you want to do with it, but that's not what needs to be fed into what you're doing for this specific thing. And I think part of that, the implementation of the AI tools is knowing your need and knowing the data that you have and making sure that your data is clean, clear, and correct before you ever get started, because we all know that trying to back out bad data is way easier than cleaning it to start.
Well,
Jamie,
folks, this all brings us on to our next discussion point, really, which is talking about AI governance strategy. I'll put it out to the group so we continue on, but I'm wondering what key components should organizations include in their AI governance framework? What should my framework look like, and what are the elements that I should be considering in the design of my governance strategy? Brenna, can you help us with this?
I think there's a lot of things. You need to have enhanced data security for sure. I think to Jamie's point, data quality practices to make sure that the data itself is accurate and high quality. You don't want to build a house on a shaky foundation. You need to have a framework for how you govern that data that needs to be updated very, very regularly. I think this is also where you need to think about hardware and software. What cloud service providers are you using? Do you have the processing capability? How are you integrating it into all the other IT programs that you have? What is your IT infrastructure? Because again, you need to have, there's a whole host of other things. You don't just build a generative AI tool. It rests upon, everything else that you've got within your organization. I think this is where you need to think about talent as well. Do you have talent that clearly understands how to work with data? Do you have specialists that understand the models that you're building? And then, are you using an open data architecture or closed data architecture? These are all things that organizations need to think about. To Jamie's point, I think the first thing is that data. Then you need to think about risk management and regulatory compliance as well. But I think all of these things sort of build upon each other.
And transparency. How can organizations strike the balance between innovation and maintaining transparency, especially when Gen AI decisions can really influence really critical business outcomes?
I think that's right. And I think within transparency, talking to people within your organization so they can recognize risks and mitigate them themselves as well, keeping that human in the loop, making sure that there's a human to validate the generative AI content that's produced. I think the other thing is sort of having those regular internal audits. If you put in, what is color is George Washington's white horse and it constantly returns black, is there a way that you can have an audit to constantly be looking at what information you're receiving. Is it accurate? Is our data accurate? How is this building upon itself is also very important.
Chris, what are some of the common legal pitfalls that we might encounter when deploying Gen AI, particularly regarding intellectual property and data usage rights?
Unfortunately, we don't know, and in fact, it is a constantly moving target. I think Brenna had said, the governance landscape or the legal landscape. To me, it's more of a tectonic plate because it keeps shifting on us. There's active litigation right now in just trying to determine who owns the intellectual property rights for data that's used from a training perspective, and it's open. It's a very open question as to which way those courts are going to lean. So the challenge there is, you're buying into a technology, not necessarily knowing where you're going to land from a compliance, legal, or regulatory perspective a couple years hence. And then there's also the challenge of, do those that are litigating or regulating this stuff, do they themselves truly understand the challenges of the technology? The answer to that is more often than not uncomfortably no, but they're trying to get up to speed. So by all means, adopt the technology, use the technology, understand the technology, but you better have a plan for backing out if you get, an unpleasant news brief on whether or not you can continue to use the technology going forward. The other challenge there is that the pace of regulation and oversight is different by different regions. The Europeans have, they're going great guns towards regulation, and in other regions it's still sort of the wild west. So if you're a multinational or you are consuming or producing data in other jurisdictions, you must be very jurisdictionally aware of how you're using the tool and the results that come from it.
So some of this stuff is still unknown, really. And Jamie, kind of getting back to your point about the culture of the organization, it really starts at the top, and it's really more so than the governance framework, perhaps. It's the heartfelt culture of the organization, ensuring that technologies are implemented in ways that respect users' rights and align with the broader societal values. Is that about right, Jamie?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think more importantly, we have to think about this as this is a tool that's designed to make us more efficient. It's not about replacing humans. It's not about any of those things. It's about, what more can we get done? And I think everyone on this call has been in a workplace environment where, you're short-staffed, you're maybe even undertrained for the position because someone's left and something else landed on your desk, and now it's got to be done by somebody and you were the closest person to it.
Hmm.
So things like that are things where, AI can kind of help fill in the gaps. But again, it's, as we keep talking about it, it is more about, utilizing the right tools, the right time, correct data, and then, making sure that that culture is that, hey, you know what, my AI tool, and here's what you run into too. People come to you, they're excited about a tool, they want to implement it, and then something happens, and the tool goes off the rails, and they're so scared for their job or whatever the ramification may be, that nobody says anything, and before you know it, you have a mushroom cloud of a problem. What started out as this little thing is now a big massive thing. And so, but having that culture of, hey, look, we're all in this together. This is why we have the checks and balances. This is why we have the regular audits. So creating that culture where people know that, hey, there's going to be mistakes with this thing. There's going to be things, there's going to be, as Chris said, hallucinations, but it's about, setting the entire organization up for success by having the right culture. And a lot of that starts with absolutely having the right data, correct data, clean data. But it also starts with having a solid culture where people are like, I need to raise my hand because something isn't right here. And then everybody stops the presses and everybody digs in to figure out where that problem happened. And so I think creating that type of a culture around AI where, yes, we're all training it, yes, we're all utilizing it, but acknowledging up front that this is literally the new frontier, and there are going to be some hiccups, but here's how we mitigate that. And maybe that's something that you write into your AI governance strategy, or your implementation strategy is, how are we going to handle hallucinations? How are we going to handle when the tool goes off the rails? So I think as long as that communication stays clear, then you can kind of maintain that same culture, and people won't be fearful, but they'll actually be more excited to use the tool.
All right, we have been here today with Jamie Grabert, president and co-founder of the consultancy group, Brenna Snyderman, managing director of the Center for Integrated Research at Deloitte, and Chris Surdak, managing director at Foundry. I always mess this up, Chris, managing director at Frontier Foundry. And indeed, Chris has provided, before we run out of time here, Chris has provided here in the chat feature a really nifty little model. The 7 R's of AI governance. Number 1, is it real? Is it authentic? Is it reasonable? Is it effective? Is it regulated? Is it efficient? Is it reliable? Does it produce predictable results? Resilient? Can it survive disruptions? Reversible? Can you undo what it has done? And recordable? Can you maintain traceability? Look, it's right there in the chat feature. Really nifty little model, Chris. Thank you so much for that. But where has our time gone? We have run into the end of the program. I'd like to ask each of my guests today if you have one quick action item that our viewers can use to take advantage of the ideas and advice today. And Chris, I'll start with you. What's your action item for us today?
I think picking up on Jamie's point, just do it. It's sort of a Nike commercial, but do so with a little bit of reverence for the possibilities that something's going to go wrong, and be prepared for that Chernobyl moment, right? Chernobyl was built with the best possible engineering. Everyone had the best of intentions. It still kind of went nuclear, literally. So, that resilience question, I think, is the biggest part. Can you undo what this thing has done? Are you prepared for when something inevitably does go wrong? And then you can adopt the technology more safely, I think. So, again, to Jamie's point, don't be afraid of it, but be very cognizant of the potential pitfalls of using the technology and be prepared for that.
That is Chris Surdak from Frontier Foundry. Chris, thanks a lot for being with us again today. Jamie, how about you? Do you have an action item for us?
Chris stole mine. No. No, I do think that it's just start, but I think more than anything is take an assessment, an internal assessment. If you're in a leadership role, take an internal assessment of your organization, and really ideal the easiest path to entry, and just start. Get the right team together, assembled, and just start.
All right, very good. That is Jamie Grabert from the consultancy group. Jamie, thank you so much for being with us today. All right, Brenna, how about you? Do you have an action item for us today?
Sure. I think what is critically important is for organizations and leaders to go into adopting generative AI with a relatively clear idea of what they're trying to achieve and what they want to do with it. Because if you don't know what success looks like, you're not going to be able to judge whether what you're doing with it is actually successful or not. You don't necessarily have to have super specific quantifiable metrics right at the start, but you should have at least some qualitative sense of what would success look like with this tool. How do we know that we're achieving what we set out to achieve? And are we ready to scale this more broadly, or do we want to try some other new types of generative AI tools as well? So I think going in with what you want to achieve and some clear sense of what success might look like is going to be very important.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That is Brenna Snyderman from Deloitte. All right, Brenna, Jamie, Chris, it has been great speaking with you today. What a great panel today. Your perspectives and advice are spot on. Thank you so much. I hope that we'll get a chance to talk again soon. And to everyone joining us today, thank you too. I hope that you'll join us again next time on December 3rd with another great panel of guests discussing the topic of delivering an ROI from conversational AI. That should be another great discussion. And don't forget to check out our sister shows, the Digital Transformation Talk and Martech Talk. You can find out more at business-reporter.uk.co. All right. And in the meantime, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect there, and check out my weekly audio podcast, the Digital Transformation Podcast. But for now, that'll do it for this episode. Join us next time, and until then, I'm Kevin Crane. Thank you so much for watching.